Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello, I'm Shruti Kapela. I teach history and politics of India at the University of Cambridge, and I write a fortnightly column for the print. Today's column is on a topic that should have generated a lot more public debate and conversation in India, which is the Pegasus story, which is about phone hacking of political opponents and critics of the current regime in India, but also others who have been caught in that story, which is called the Pegasus spyware story. It's a global story on phone hacking, on data hacking, actually, to be more precise. So in this column today, I tried to argue a couple of things. One was, why is that story sort of leaving people a bit bored? It's not catching the attention, and why, secondly, data is really the new story on the question of democracy globally, but India is leading the way into the high stakes game on the question of data democracy. And above all, this is not a question of privacy, but actually it is a question more fundamental than that, and concerns your, mine, everybody's sovereignty, but above all, India's sovereignty. So Shashi Tharoor, was left high and dry at the last minute last week, as we know, because he heads the Parliamentary Committee on Information and Technology. Now, the Congress MP was trying to summon his colleagues, particularly from the Treasury benches, i.e. from the government, to discuss questions of data breaches and privacy, or the Pegasus spyware scandal. And he was really merely doing his duty in trying to get, his peers, his political peers, to come and actually sit down and deliberate and see what a political consensus or even intervention ought to be on this. But it was interesting that Tharoor had also confessed 24 hours before being left on high and dry to actually the print that while the issue was incredibly explosive as it posed serious dangers to democracy, the story, he said very honestly, was not generating the attention it deserved. And he said, particularly amongst the voting public, and it's also as well, it's not really a bread and butter issue, except my main argument would be that it is a bread and butter issue. Data is increasingly not a matter of privacy, but it is a public good. So whether it concerns your caste, my caste, or your income, data is essential now to democracy. And you don't have to be a Prashant Kishore to know that. Data is, of course, an issue that remains unattractive to public sympathy. It's not something we want to talk about. Yet it's precisely because it is everywhere. It is incredibly abstract, and it's therefore very difficult to capture, and let alone, mobilize any sentiment on it. But interestingly, this public apathy that we can see on this mega story will soon be credited, no doubt, by spin doctors and alike, that this is actually down to Prime Minister Modi's Teflon capacity to weather political storms. Having said that, internationally, the Pegasus spyware story has certainly attracted the wrong kind of attention for India, particularly with The Economist in its latest issue dubbing the scandal as a seven-headed scandal for India's troubled democracy. Now, what is data? Is it information, or what is the way in which it intersects with political news? Now, in the first instance, the Pegasus story exposes that data is now endangering global democracy. India is, of course, in that list, in very fine company of Saudi Arabia and Hungary for deploying the Israeli government-mandated cutting-edge spyware against its own citizens. But, the list, which was the Pegasus scandal of the 1,000, just 1,000 odd hacked accounts, were all a roll call primarily of the Modi government's critics, including, of course, Rahul Gandhi, but also rather unpowerful academics, but who were known critics of the government, which is what has made it into a political scandal and a political story. So why is it, therefore, not attracting the attention? It should be a big story. But at an obvious, superficial, but I think not silly level, this Pegasus spyware expose is different from earlier exposes, primarily of the WikiLeaks variety, because there are no details of conversations, only a list of those who have been hacked into. even though they are primarily political names and phone numbers. But also, unlike WikiLeaks, there's no whistleblower in the form of, say, Julian Assange or, say, Edward Snowden in another case. There's no one person. So one of the interesting things in which the way in which news has changed precisely in the digital world is that if there is no emotional or personal element, precisely because there's so much information going around, that, we tend to ignore it. In a way, this is what the author William Davis, who's written a fantastic book called Nervous States, argues, that really in this data age, the dominance of feelings kind of has, trumped expertise and detailed conversation. And I think that has something to do with this. This is pretty dry, pretty boring stuff. I mean, the data can be boring. And in fact, the encrypted conversations that have been hacked by the spyware are nothing but data. But it's not just those 1,000 odd people who have that data. You, me, we all are carrying data, whether it is our DNA or any number of likes, for instance, whether you like this video, for instance, in an app, or to voting behavior, to the, a clothing thing that you might like. Data is everywhere, but it is also, interestingly, much like individual freedom, our individual possession. So it is the means and mechanism through which our life is operating today, from WhatsApp to Facebook, but of course from our Aadhaar to your bank ATM card. So as a result, that data then becomes what is called algorithm. So each individual, say like myself, has multiple data set points, from the color of my shirt today to the brand I may have bought it from, to, as it were, other forms of, likes on any number of interfaces. Individuals become, as it were, targeted set points for advertising, but also for surveillance. And then this has actually been called a coup from the top, or a form of surveillance capital, which is a really big word to really say, well, actually, in these everyday processes and everyday acts, our rights, individual rights, are being stripped off ourselves thanks to data mining. So your data, or my data, is actually someone else's big bread and butter. So it is a bread and butter issue. It is a public good. And it is a ginormous big bread. I mean, look at the turnover of any Silicon Valley data conglomerate. And you just, these are, intricate algorithm sets, like a, big French cake with a lot of icing. And you just have to ask Mark Zuckerberg to the extent of how profitable this is. Except that if it is political data or information of the kind that has been hacked into by Pegasus, then that has no value. That is invaluable in itself. Now, in Delhi's policy wonk circles, and there are fairly many policy circles in Delhi, the value of data has actually been well known, and for some long time. So over the last 5 years, there was a word and a cliche I would constantly hear, almost becoming a cliche, which is that data is the new oil. Indeed, it is, of course, the prime commodity of our century, or what is called the fourth industrial revolution. Oil is, boringly enough, very last century. But data, I think, more fundamentally, much like oil, which caused wars, data is not causing wars as much as it is really distorting and driving democracy in very weird ways. So if you look at 10 years ago and the rise of data communication such as Facebook or even WhatsApp, during the age of Arab Spring, whether it was Tunisia or whether it was Egypt, it was seen to be something which is freeing unfree people, right? I mean, even if it were to go to places which are unfree, you will have democracy because, hey, this cuts across the deep state, the problems of state surveillance. But soon after the Arab Spring came one of the biggest scandals, which is called the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Nothing to do with my university, I should say very quickly. It was a name that was shared, but it was a scandal where you saw social media data, particularly Facebook data, and by extension WhatsApp data, which was manipulated by the company in the big stakes election in the Trump election in America. At the same time, when this was happening, when you saw, well, these singularities, as they're called, these big companies, as Silicon Valleys, you heard a new word in Delhi, particularly it was called data sovereignty. So what was the point was that on the one hand, you have WhatsApp, which is encrypted, but which can be hacked into by and can be mined by private companies. And then particularly it can only be hacked actually by an Israeli government mandated spyware. And then you have, as it were, this problem between a big giant company like, say, Facebook, WhatsApp, and on the other side, an Israeli mandated Pegasus-like software. And the individual is caught between. So if you're a political actor, big or small, Rahul Gandhi, or a minor actor even in the back of Beyond or in Delhi, you are really squeezed out between these two players, i.e. the private data owners and the state data hackers. So data sovereignty was meant to be the answer to Silicon Valley singularities who were guzzling Indian data for eye-watering sums. The state or political sovereign order, it was the point was that, look, the state ought to intervene, and data sovereignty it tried to convey the work of the state in restoring power, in reigning in power against these so-called Silicon Valley singularities. But this has proven to be impossible, whether it is the Indian Parliamentary Committee or other empowered bodies in rest of the democratic world. There's really not been a very good answer given by these companies, let alone any question of regulating them in any way. So if data mining companies have become supra-sovereign, then our governments, which are entrusted, we entrust our governments to hold our interest, have also turned against their own citizens because they are using digital surveillance against political opponents. So it's actually a sign of weakened state authority, because surveillance of the state by the state on its political opponents is really a sign of weakness of its own authority. Tellingly, I mean, if you look at and its own sovereign authority, power is the bedrock of state power. Tellingly, today, the legal weapon of choice against a political opposition is also called sedition. And it's sedition, if you think about the law, is actually a statute based also in relation to sovereign power and loyalty towards it. So surveillance actually has just become the context and even the wider condition of Indian democracy. And sedition has become its prime punishment. So when critics of data breaches use the word privacy, I think this will cut no ice, because it sounds not only elitist or precious, but it is totally way off the mark. Today, the individual who may or may not possess any privacy has already been shattered and split apart into multiple data sets. And in many instances, it is by our own consent or our own volition, whether it is through the swipe of a card, and most of that data is indeed owned by an offshore company or two. So the individual, even say if it's unwashed, it's not being hacked by the state, still is entirely vulnerable as a legal category or even a political category. So Pegasus to me is not a list, simply about a list of 1,000 names that have been hacked. Of course, that list in a way confirms the status of those on that list as the most bothersome people to the most powerful of the land. But really what Pegasus has highlighted is the fundamental reshaping and redrawing of sovereignty in our times. This is especially important because it is another sovereign state and a company that have conducted political surveillance on India's citizens. So the Pegasus story, it has actually exposed the weaknesses and the anxiety and the nervousness of the surveillance state. And above all, it has shown that the sovereign power of the state is increasingly looking, if not hollow, but certainly quite weak. This, of course, cannot be boring. This cannot be a cause for apathy. I do think The Economist was wrong in saying that this is about India's troubled democracy. I think it is more fundamental than that. In fact, it is every Indian's sovereignty and therefore India's sovereignty that looks entirely exposed.